The clinking of champagne glasses echoed through the glittering ballroom. Golden chandeliers sparkled above, casting soft light over silk gowns and polished tuxedos. Laughter rippled through the air, but at the far end of the hall, where waiters rushed with trays of caviar and crystal, a young woman stood in the shadows, sleeves rolled up, scrubbing dishes. Her name was Elena. She had not dressed for a gala. No glittering jewelry adorned her neck, no elegant heels clicked across the marble floor. Instead, her simple dress was splattered with soap and water, her hands raw from hours of washing. To the crowd of high society guests, she wasn't a guest at all. She was invisible. Or worse, she was a target. "Look at her," whispered one woman in a diamond-studded gown, her voice sharp enough to cut through the music. "Did she sneak in through the back door?" Another laughed, sipping champagne. "No, they must have run out of servants. Can you imagine a gala in this mansion and she's the help? Pathetic." Their laughter stabbed at Elena's heart, but she forced a quiet smile and kept scrubbing. She had learned long ago that silence was safer than fighting back. But deep inside, she wondered if only they knew the truth. Because the mansion where the guests strutted proudly, the marble floors they trampled without thought, the chandeliers above their heads, none of it belonged to them. It belonged to her husband. And tonight, their arrogance would cost them more than they could ever imagine. Moon. Backstory begins. Elena hadn't grown up in wealth. Her childhood was marked by small kitchens, second-hand clothes, and nights when dinner was nothing more than bread and water. But her parents had taught her something that diamonds could never buy: dignity. "Never look down on anyone," her mother used to say, wiping her hands after long hours at the market. "Today you may serve others, tomorrow they may serve you. Life changes faster than we think." Those words lived in Elena's heart. Even as a teenager, when she worked double shifts as a waitress in a rundown cafe, she carried herself with quiet pride. She didn't see herself as less than anyone else. She saw herself as capable. And it was in that very cafe, years ago, that she met Adrian. At first, he seemed like an ordinary customer. Clean suit, polite smile, the kind of man who left generous tips without a second thought. But Elena noticed something different about him. He asked questions. He listened. While other men barely remembered her name, Adrian remembered her favorite book, the way she hummed while pouring coffee, the fact that she dreamed of one day studying literature. He wasn't flashy. He didn't boast. What Elena didn't know then was that Adrian wasn't just another businessman grabbing lunch. He was one of the country's youngest billionaires, an heir to a sprawling empire, yes, but also a man who had doubled it through his own sharp mind. He could have had any woman in the world, and yet he returned to the small cafe every week, until one day he asked her out for a walk.
Elena hesitated. She wasn't blind. She saw his tailored suits, his expensive car, the whispers of, "He must be rich." But Adrian disarmed her fears with a laugh. "I don't want a trophy wife," he told her that night under the streetlights. "I want someone real, someone who knows the value of work, of respect." And so began a love story that no one in the high circles could understand. The Waitress and the Billionaire. Transition to present Gala. Years passed, and their bond only grew stronger. Adrian introduced her to his world, but Elena never lost herself in the glitter. She chose simplicity over extravagance, humility over pride. She supported his work, but never flaunted his wealth. So when Adrian invited her to accompany him to the grand annual gala he hosted at their mansion, Elena wasn't surprised that she felt out of place. She hadn't even wanted to attend. Her heart belonged to quiet nights, not crowded ballrooms. But Adrian insisted gently. "I want them to see who my real treasure is," he said with that same earnestness that had melted her heart years ago. And so Elena agreed. But yet fate had a cruel sense of humor. Adrian had been delayed by urgent business that evening, leaving Elena to arrive alone at the mansion. And in the chaos of arriving staff and bustling guests, a cruel mistake, or perhaps a deliberate insult, took place. Someone shoved a tray into her hands. Someone barked, "Dishes need clearing. Don't stand there." And before Elena could explain, before she could protest, she was swept into the kitchen, swallowed by the endless cycle of dirty plates and mocking stares. Now, standing over a sink full of soap, Elena endured the whispers and laughter of the wealthy. But deep inside, she wasn't broken. She remembered her mother's words. She remembered Adrian's love, and she knew the night was far from over. Because when Adrian walked through those golden doors, the truth would shatter every cruel smile in the room.
The night grew louder as music swelled through the ballroom. A live orchestra played a sweeping waltz, and couples swirled across the polished floor. Waiters carried silver trays piled with delicacies, and champagne glasses glittered like stars in the guests' hands. But in the corner of the kitchen, away from the laughter and applause, Elena continued her quiet task, scrubbing, drying, stacking. Every so often she glanced at the clock. Adrian should have arrived by now. Instead, she was alone. And alone, she was easy prey. A woman with fiery red lipstick and a pearl necklace sauntered into the kitchen, her heels clicking sharply against the tiles. She stopped in front of Elena and smirked. My, she purred, tilting her head. "You don't look like you belong here. Did you sneak in through the staff entrance?" Elena tried to answer politely. "I think there's been some mistake. But the woman waved her hand dismissively. "Mistake? No, darling. The mistake is thinking someone like you deserves to be in a place like this. Scrubbing dishes suits you far more than sipping champagne." Her laugh echoed as she left, leaving Elena gripping the edge of the sink, her knuckles white. She wasn't angry for herself. She was angry at the cruelty, at the ease with which people crushed others to feel taller. Moments later, another group entered, 3 men in tailored suits, their laughter booming. One of them pointed at her with a mocking grin. "Look at that! Even the help looks nervous tonight. Are we sure she's not one of those charity cases Adrian invited years ago? What was her name? Elena, right?" The others chuckled. "Yes, I remember. Some poor girl he pulled out of a cafe. I heard he got tired of her. Probably left her to earn her keep scrubbing dishes." The words stung like daggers, not because they were true, but because they revealed how little these men understood about loyalty, about love. Still, Elena said nothing. She had promised herself never to let their poison steal her peace. Yet deep down, her chest tightened. Where was Adrian? The cruel joke. Later that evening, when the music reached its peak, a tall, imposing man stood at the center of the ballroom. He tapped his glass with a spoon, silencing the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "before we raise a toast, I think we should acknowledge the real entertainment of the night." He gestured toward the kitchen door, where Elena had just stepped out carrying a tray of clean glasses. All eyes turned to her. The man's grin widened. "There she is,
Our little dishwasher. Look at her hands, red from soap. Don't you think it's delightful? At a gala in this mansion, and this is the best help they could find?" Laughter erupted across the hall. Some tried to stifle it behind napkins, but many laughed openly, pointing and whispering. Elena froze, the tray trembling in her hands. Heat rose to her cheeks, but she stood tall, refusing to bow her head. In that moment, her mother's voice echoed in her mind. "Dignity, my child. No one can take it unless you give it away." So she straightened her back, placed the tray gently on the nearest table, and turned to leave the room with quiet grace. But the laughter followed her like a cruel shadow. The silent strength. What the guests didn't know was that every insult, every sneer, every mocking laugh was being noted. Because even without Adrian present, Elena was not powerless. She was his wife. She knew every corner of this mansion. She knew which secret doors led to his study, where the portraits of their ancestors hung, and where the key to the family vault was kept. This wasn't just a mansion, it was home. And as the crowd mocked her, she realized something they could not. Tonight was a test of whether she would crumble or stand firm. Elena chose the latter. She returned to the kitchen and continued her work, humming softly to herself. It wasn't weakness, it was patience, because she knew the storm was coming, and when it arrived, every cruel smile would fade, foreshadowing Adrian's arrival. Meanwhile, outside the mansion, a sleek black car pulled into the driveway. The chauffeur hurried to open the door, and out stepped Adrian, tall and composed, his sharp suit glowing under the lights. His phone buzzed in his pocket, but he ignored it. His eyes were fixed on the mansion, on the sounds of laughter spilling through the golden doors. He was late, yes, but he was here now. And when he walked in, the night would change forever.
The heavy doors of the ballroom opened with a low creak, though the orchestra played on, masking the sound. A few guests turned their heads toward the entrance and froze. Adrian Morrison had arrived. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a black suit cut to perfection, he radiated an aura that silenced even the noisiest conversations. His reputation preceded him, ruthless in business, impossibly wealthy, yet fiercely private. Many had been waiting for his entrance all evening, hoping for a moment of his attention. But Adrian's eyes were not on them. They were searching. He scanned the crowd once, twice, his brow furrowed. And then, as if guided by instinct, his gaze landed on the far end of the ballroom, where Elena stood at the edge of the kitchen doors, holding a towel in her hands. Her cheeks were flush from humiliation, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears, but her posture was steady, proud. Adrian's chest tightened. Without hesitation, he strode across the room. Guests parted like waves before him, whispering and gasping at his presence. But Adrian didn't spare them a glance. His attention was locked on Elena. The moment of recognition. "Elena!" His voice was low, urgent, filled with concern. She looked up, startled. "Adrian!" He stopped in front of her, taking in her uniform, the soap stains on her hands, the way others were still snickering behind their glasses of champagne. "What are you doing like this?" he asked, his voice tight. Before Elena could answer, a shrill laugh pierced the air. It was Priscilla, the event organizer, standing proudly in her glittering gown. "Oh, don't be fooled, Mr. Morrison. She's just part of the staff. A little dish girl we put to work tonight, nothing more." The crowd chuckled, emboldened by her tone. Adrian turned slowly, his gaze settling on Priscilla. The coldness in his eyes made her words falter. "Nothing more." His voice was sharp as a blade. "You dare call my wife nothing more?"
The silence before the storm. The room went dead quiet. Forks clinked against plates, glasses stilled in trembling hands. Priscilla's painted smile collapsed. "Wife?" she stammered. That can't be. She's a—" "Enough." Adrian's tone was final, brooking no argument. He reached for Elena's hands, lifting them gently, the soap still fresh on her skin. He kissed her knuckles before turning back to the crowd. "This woman you've mocked, humiliated, ordered to scrub your dishes. She is Elena Morrison, my wife, the lady of this mansion." Gasps rippled across the ballroom. Some guests looked mortified, others pale as ghosts. Elena stood frozen, unsure whether to cry or laugh. The truth, so long hidden, now lay bare in front of them all. Adrian's fury. Adrian wasn't done. "I left my wife for less than an hour, and in that time you vultures thought it amusing to tear her down." His eyes swept the crowd, piercing through each face that had sneered at her. "You revealed your true selves tonight, not as guests of honor, but as cowards who prey on kindness." He paused, letting the words sink in. The orchestra had gone silent, and the only sound was the pounding of fearful hearts. "Tell me," Adrian continued, his voice rising, "if this is how you treat the woman of this house, how do you treat the servers, the drivers, the cleaners who don't wear a title? How do you treat those who can't defend themselves?" No one answered. Heads dropped. Shoes shuffled awkwardly against marble. Elena speaks. Elena placed her hand on Adrian's arm. "Let me," she whispered. He looked at her, then nodded, stepping aside. She turned to face the crowd, her voice steady, though her heart raced. "Yes, I am Elena Morrison, but tonight I was also just Elena, the girl in a servant's uniform, and what I saw was ugliness. The ugliness of people who think wealth is a crown and kindness a burden." Her gaze landed on Catherine, the woman in the red dress who had ridiculed her earlier. Catherine flinched and looked away. "But here's what you all forgot," she continued, her tone firm yet calm. "Respect isn't given because of money. It isn't reserved for the powerful. It belongs to every human being. The way you treat a server, a driver, a janitor, that is the measure of who you truly are." The public consequences. Adrian stepped forward again, his presence thunderous. "And since some of you failed this test," he said coldly, "understand this. Our company will not do business with those who insult my wife or the dignity of honest work. Consider every deal, every partnership we've discussed, canceled." A collective gasp swept the room. Deals worth millions, perhaps billions, evaporated in a heartbeat. Catherine's face drained of color. Her husband's company had been negotiating with Adrian for months. Now it was finished. Priscilla stumbled, her voice trembling. "Mr. Morrison, please, I didn't know. If I had realized—" Adrian cut her off with a glare. "You shouldn't need to know who someone is to treat them with respect." The turning point. The ballroom shifted. Shame hung heavy in the air. Some guests left quickly, unable to face the weight of their actions. Others lingered, their expressions contrite, realizing too late that their cruelty had cost them dearly. But a few approached Elena with sincerity. "I'm so sorry. I laughed, but I shouldn't have. You're right. I'll do better." Elena offered a small nod.
Then prove it not to me, but to the people you meet every day. The aftermath of truth. As the crowd dispersed, Adrian wrapped his arm around Elena and led her away from the whispers and stares. They entered the quiet of the study, the fire crackling softly. Adrian cupped her face gently. "You should never have gone through that. Not here, not in our home." Elena smiled faintly. "It was painful, yes, but maybe it was necessary. Now they've seen themselves for who they are." His jaw tightened. "And now they'll pay the price." She touched his hand, shaking her head softly. "No, let the shame be their punishment. The lesson has already been delivered." For a moment, silence stretched between them. Then Adrian leaned down and kissed her forehead, his voice breaking with pride. "You are stronger than any of them, Elena, and tonight the world saw it."
The gala did not end with music and laughter that night. It ended in silence. Guests left in small clusters, some avoiding eye contact, others whispering nervously as they hurried past Adrian and Elena. The marble floors echoed with the sharp click of heels and the shuffle of polished shoes, but the grandeur of the ballroom had lost its magic. The chandeliers still glittered, the champagne still sparkled in crystal glasses, but the air had shifted. What had been an evening of pride and pretense was now a mirror, reflecting ugliness none of them had expected to see. Priscilla's fall. At the center of the storm was Priscilla, the once unshakable queen of the charity circuit. For decades, she had controlled invitations, placements, and social reputations. A nod from her could open doors. Her disapproval could close them. But that night, she had been exposed. Word spread quickly. By the next morning, whispers had turned into calls, and calls into confirmations. Priscilla would no longer be the event organizer of choice. She humiliated Mr. Morrison's wife. She mocked a woman she thought was beneath her. Can you imagine, in his own home? Donors pulled out, sponsors cut ties, and charities, afraid of losing Adrian's support, publicly distanced themselves from her. The empire she had built over 20 years crumbled in less than 24 hours. Priscilla herself sat in her penthouse suite, staring at the glowing city lights through tear-filled eyes. For the first time in her career, no one was answering her calls. Catherine's shame. Catherine fared no better. Her cruel words to Elena, the mocking laughter, the claims that she wasn't smart enough or pretty enough, had not only reached Adrian's ears, but now circulated in whispers across every social circle in the city. Her husband's business was on the edge of sealing a major deal with Adrian's company. But with a single sentence at the gala, Adrian had cut them off. The cancellation sent shockwaves through the industry. Stocks dipped, partners withdrew, and within weeks, Catherine's husband was forced to explain to shareholders how his wife's arrogance had cost them millions. At home, Catherine avoided the mirror. Every reflection reminded her of the night she laughed at Elena while the woman's hands were raw from dishwater, only to discover that she had been mocking the very owner of the mansion she stood in. Her name became a punchline in conversations. Invitations she once took for granted never arrived again. The ripple effect among guests. But not all consequences were ruin. For some, the night became a catalyst for change. Several guests wrote letters to Elena, their words raw with apology. "I was silent when I should have spoken. I saw how they treated you, and I did nothing. I am ashamed. Thank you for opening my eyes." Others went further.
A senator's wife began volunteering weekly at a soup kitchen, anonymously at first, until she admitted to Elena months later that she had been humbled by that night. A wealthy banker, notorious for his arrogance, donated an entire wing to the local hospital, not under his name, but quietly, for the workers he inspired.
The gala that began as a display of wealth became remembered as a turning point in compassion. The morning after. In the Morrison mansion, the next morning was still. The staff moved quietly through the halls, their respect for Elena deepened beyond measure. For them, she was no longer just the kind wife of the master of the house. She was someone who had stood in their place, felt their burdens, and defended their dignity. Elena sat at the long oak breakfast table, her fingers curled around a warm cup of coffee. Across from her, Adrian scanned the morning news. Headlines screamed from every paper. Billionaire's wife humiliated at Gala. Society exposed. Elena Morrison, from servant to lady of the house. Respect beyond wealth, the night that changed high society. Adrian folded the paper and looked at her with concern. "Do you regret it?" Elena thought for a long moment. She could still hear Catherine's laughter, still feel the sting of Priscilla's commands, still taste the bitterness of soap on her tongue. "I regret," she said softly, "that it was necessary, but not that I did it." Adrian reached across the table and took her hand. His grip was firm, grounding. "You shouldn't have been the one to teach them this lesson. It shouldn't have taken your pain for them to see." Elena gave a small smile. "Maybe not. But sometimes the mirror has to be held high, Adrian. Sometimes people need to see themselves clearly, even if it hurts." Elena's reflection. Later that day, Elena walked through the quiet halls of the mansion. She paused in the kitchen where she had stood the night before, sleeves rolled up, hands raw. The sink was empty now, polished clean. She placed her hand on the counter and closed her eyes. "I had the choice to walk away," she thought. "I had the choice to reveal my name. That is what privilege means. But the others, the women and men who work here every day, they don't have that choice. Their dignity depends on the kindness of strangers, and too often, that kindness is denied." That was the real lesson of the night, not just for the guests, but for her too. She had the power to choose, and with that power came responsibility. Responsibility to speak for those who couldn't, to defend those who weren't heard, to remind the world that respect should never depend on a name, a title, or a fortune. The legacy of the Gala. Weeks later, people were still talking about the Morrison Gala. Social commentators wrote essays about privilege and respect. Influencers shared clips of Elena's words, replayed millions of times across social media. The story trended globally under a single hashtag, "Respect Everyone." For years to come, the Gala would be remembered not for its glittering chandeliers or the luxury it displayed, but for the moment a billionaire's wife chose to become invisible and revealed the truth about everyone else. Closing reflection for the audience. Elena's voice lingered like a quiet echo. The way you treat those you think are beneath you reveals more about your soul than the way you treat those you admire. Respect is not a currency for the rich. It is the birthright of every human being. And with that, her story closed, not with applause, but with a lesson carried far beyond the walls of the Morrison mansion.
The storm outside had passed, but in the Morrison mansion, the echoes of the gala still lingered. For days, Elena could not walk through the city without hearing whispers. Some were in awe, some in shame, and some in admiration. But for Elena, it was never about the whispers. It was about the silence she had felt in that kitchen, the silence of all the workers who had been ordered, mocked, and ignored. A conversation at midnight. One evening, long after the staff had gone home, Elena sat by the grand piano in the living room. The soft glow of candlelight reflected in the polished surface. Adrian found her there, her fingers gently tracing the keys, though she did not play. "You haven't been sleeping," he said. Elena smiled faintly. "Neither have you." He sat beside her, his hand brushing hers. "Tell me what's on their mind." For a long while, she said nothing. Then, softly, "Do you know what haunted me most that night? It wasn't Catherine's words. It wasn't Priscilla's cruelty. It was the faces of the staff. How quickly they looked away when I was humiliated. How silent they became. Not because they agreed with her, but because they couldn't risk defending me. They knew the cost of speaking up." Adrian's jaw tightened. He understood. He had grown up with privilege, inherited wealth, and choices others never had. Elena had shown him the fragility of dignity in a world that judged worth by fortune. "They shouldn't have to choose silence to keep their jobs," Adrian said firmly. Elena looked at him with steady eyes. "Then let's make sure they don't have to." Weeks later, Adrian and Elena launched a foundation, not one of glittering galas or empty speeches, but a foundation dedicated to the workers who built the very structures the wealthy celebrated in. They called it the Respect Initiative. The foundation provided legal aid for workers facing abuse, scholarships for service staff's children, and anonymous reporting lines to protect employees from humiliation. When Adrian announced it, the city was stunned. When Elena spoke about it, the world listened. At the launch, she stood before a crowd of journalists and dignitaries, her voice calm but unwavering. "Wealth may open doors, but respect keeps them open." What I learned that night was simple. Status can be stripped in an instant, but dignity belongs to all of us. And if society cannot recognize that truth, then society itself will crumble under the weight of its arrogance. Her words went viral again, not as a scandal this time, but as a movement. Priscilla's apology. Months later, a letter arrived at the Morrison mansion. It was handwritten, trembling, with smudges where tears had fallen. It was from Priscilla. "I was wrong, not just to you, but to every worker I dismissed, every person I belittled. Losing everything showed me who I was, and I do not like the woman I see. If you can find it in your heart to forgive me, I want to begin again."
Elena read it silently, then folded it with care. Forgiveness did not erase the pain, but it planted the possibility of change. And that, she believed, was worth more than revenge. Catherine's silence. Catherine, however, never wrote. Her family had withdrawn from the public eye, her once lavish lifestyle replaced by quiet anonymity. Elena thought of her sometimes, not with anger, but with pity. Because Catherine had not just lost her social standing, she had lost the opportunity to grow. Arrogance had been her shield, and without it she chose invisibility over transformation. The quiet power of choice. One evening, months after the gala, Elena returned to the same restaurant where she had once been humiliated. But this time she did not walk in as a guest of honor. She asked the manager for an apron. For 3 hours she worked alongside the staff, taking orders, clearing dishes, refilling glasses. Some patrons recognized her and whispered in shock. But Elena only smiled. When one young waitress asked, "Why are you doing this, Mrs. Morrison?" Elena replied gently, "Because I can choose to. And if I have that choice, I should never forget those who don't." A story that spread beyond borders. News outlets across the globe picked up Elena's story. From New York to Tokyo, from London to Cape Town, the lesson resonated. Leaders quoted her words in speeches. Teachers shared her story in classrooms. And workers across industries found strength in the reminder that dignity was not negotiable. And while some dismissed it as a fleeting trend, for many, it was a turning point. Restaurants began training staff on respectful treatment. Corporations introduced new codes of conduct. Even political debates echoed her call for equality. One act, one choice, one night, had ignited change. The final reflection. Audience moral. Years later, when Elena looked back on that night at the gala, she did not remember the glittering gowns or the golden chandeliers. She remembered the clatter of dishes in the sink, the sting of soap in her hands, the laughter that cut sharper than knives. But above all, she remembered the silence of those who had no choice but to endure. And so she spoke, one last time, not to the elite of the world, but to anyone who would listen. The true measure of your character is not how you treat those above you, nor how you flatter those beside you. It is how you honor those you believe are beneath you. For in that moment, you reveal who you truly are. And with that, her story closed. Etched not in gold, but in truth.